Here we got two guys getting ready for a heavy lower body Monday lift, and I'm going to show you how I do some of the skill work before the lift and how it complements the weight room. I'm not going to show you the lift itself, but I'll show you the final game they do just prior to lifting and heading to the weight room. So these guys would have just finished a dynamic warm-up, got some jumps, got some sprints in, and then we put the pads on. Now, not all year do I use the helmet, but this is a month before training camp in this instance. Put the helmet on and get them acclimated. It may look crazy, but to me, it's real crazy to go 6 months without wearing pads, playing football against air and hitting blocking shields and thinking you're going to be ready to run 100 reps on the third day of camp in pads. So we all have our definition of crazy. Now, these are just drills, watered down drills. What I'm just looking for is an offensive guy and a mostly cooperative defender. We got a college senior and like a 9-year NFL vet. So it kind of turns into a masterminds because there's a lot of coaching instruction going on, like in conversation form, just between them. They're seeing something. Oh, why do you do this? Or how should I do this? Let them talk, let them work. But it's just, for the most part, cooperative drilling. So not a ton of problem solving. So back to the shoulder pads. I always wear shoulder pads or nothing, if we're like on mats or something. But always wear shoulder pads, no blocking shields. Don't hate them, but I think they're more for youth football, high school football to a degree, and return to play from injury. Because from a skill standpoint, I think they're at the bottom of the spectrum. To me, they're just a big, static, predictable surface. There's no independent movement. There's no hand swiping. It takes away the rotation. And it really takes away the consequences of being wrong. I do think they're good for getting us ready to brace for contact. I get linear force development, which is why they're good for return to play and young guys. But O-line play is not just about force. Everyone talks about force, but it's not force for the sake of it. It's how you organize force. And organizing force through perception and timing and spacing and movement and problem solving based on the intent of the play, the intent of the defender, the intent of what you want to do to him. It's the organization of force. So real defenders, unlike those holding shields, they move, they counter, they change, they leverage, they remove post. A shield can do some of that, but to a much lesser degree. So you're not really solving problems. And the shield, to me, reduces many of the consequences of blocking. And in most contact and combat sports, if you remove consequences, you remove higher learning. It's like in boxing, you want to keep your hands up, you want to teach someone to keep their hands up, punch them in the face. Because that consequence is going to make them better. It's going to give them a skill. They're going to learn real quick. Well, maybe I need to keep my hands up because I don't like getting punched. But the value of the shield is that they reduce collision. I guess they let athletes get a lot of contacts and practice bracing. But again, there's a compromise. They give you a safer exposure to impact without real problem solving. And if it's just force, if that's the key to it, it can be done way more effectively, much more effectively with heavy sleds and weights in general prep fashion. So the shield, to me, is more general prep. So the trade-off is using blocking shield sits in the middle. They are useful for managing contact load, but limited for, let's say, peak force production that you would do in a weight room. And from a development standpoint, they're very limited in skill, and that's really what matters. And the thicker the shield, the better job it does at absorbing the collision or reducing that hit, because once you hit the person holding the shield, that shield is taking on a lot of that force. But it also reduces a lot of the feedback we're looking for as athletes, the things we need to feel, like their pressure or where they're moving or where they're changing the angle. We need those things. And the shield is such a static, predictable surface, as I've said, that it takes it away. So it's taking away from the athlete's skill development. So they are safer, but they're just less effective for both. If we're talking skill, the shield is just less effective for skill development and then meaningful physical prep, because there's better ways for us to develop force. I do like those thin shields that are basically like padded shoulder pads. You kind of have a Velcro strap that goes around your neck. You still have your arms, but I still think shoulder pads themselves are the best option. They do preserve the spacing, the leverage, the feedback, and it's basically what we're going to feel in a game. So instead of over padding every environment and practice and learning environment we're in with shields and bags and cones everywhere, and especially over padding our defenders, if it's a safety standpoint, if you're using the pad for safety, let's just manage the load and intensity more. And then we can let football be football, keep the interactions of our drills and our skill as close to the game as possible. And I know what you're going to say. What about boxing when they're going to town on the heavy bag and they're just punching this dead object that's just hanging there? First off, it's mostly conditioning. All those guys have plenty of data of being punched in the face, avoiding punches in the face, and punching people in the face. And the other question I get is the pad work. And there's a lot of context to the pad work as it pertains to skill work, especially like in sports like Muay Thai. So in striking sports where they also use pads, or we'll just call them mini shields, a good pad holder is going to hold that pad right by their face, because that way the fighter still has to solve for those distance problems, and they learn their range of their different strikes. And if you have a bad pad holder or a novice or something, they're going to hold the pads way out there. So it doesn't account for the range. If anything, they're probably giving you bad habits because you think you're closer than you are, because you're used to punching things a mile away from your opponent's face. And that's how I look at these giant shields that we have in football, the bigger they are, because we're so far away from the defender, not to mention that it takes them out of their stance. Rarely do you see them get into a three-point stance. There's no hands, there's no clutter, there's nothing, no feints or anything for us to account for when they're holding these big shields. And in the striking sports, the even better pad holders, they're going to throw counters at random, so the fighter has to stay defensively responsible, which is the same principle in offensive line play. Once you add in live, responsive feedback, and consequences, the athlete can't just blindly execute. They have to perceive, they have to solve, they have to stay honest. And if you got this big bag and you're holding this big bag and your arms aren't being useful as a defender, you're not keeping that offensive lineman honest. And then this brings me to today's game, and this is my favorite game to do before heavy lower body days, especially that final stretch before you report to training camp. As you can see, both guys are starting in a fitted position, so we're taking away the collision, we're protecting the brains, and this is a symmetrical game because both athletes share the same task, and that is to push the other out of the circle, or in this case, there's no circle. You just get the best of the opponent. So it's not specific because there's no true offense and defensive role. It eliminates the asymmetry and even some of the consequences, like, which is a weakness, from a skill point standpoint, the consequences of like maintaining a connection. Since there's no defender trying to shuck you off, you're pretty much, the two of you are not going to be, you're going to stay connected the whole time. So I like this before lower body days. I believe it's superior in many ways to heavy sleds or prowlers, and I love heavy prowlers, or especially blocking shields, but you have a live resisting opponent forcing you to adapt to pressure, to adjust your base, and reorganize force in real time rather than just execute into a dead object. So I like this because they're exploring, they're finding ways to move people. You're not just going force to force. Sometimes you're taking their force away, changing the angle, taking them where they want to go. And from a physical prep standpoint, it also develops agility under load with redirection, and in theory, it should improve your tissue tolerance for the actual demands of the game. And with the 5-second on is what we do, and 40-second rest, and we'll do 5 reps. And as the summer goes on, we'll work up to 3 rounds of 5 reps. It's kind of a Buddy Morris special from a time constraint. It does complement strength and skill. And we all know we're going to pass the conditioning test for flying colors, but that first series we do a blocking, we're dead tired. So this gets us ready because these short little efforts of football, they kind of do allow for near max force without overly exhausting us, especially with that 40-second break. And we get really good at recovering during those 40-second break. The 5-second might be hard, but we recover better. And I do believe it bridges that weight room, because all those qualities we build through the weight room with heavy weights, you got to lift heavy weights. It kind of places them into a live problem-solving environment. So the strength has to be organized. You're not just, producing force. You have to organize it.